All right, what is going on, people? You know that sound is the Unfiltered Bands means. Yes, another episode of Unfiltered coming your way. This one officially down to episode 181. You could jump on board the revolution on Twitter and, of course, get us on Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast, Equal Opportunists, or we find us on YouTube as well. And the we today, myself and my dude, Mark Feinsand, MLB.com, MLB Network. Luckily, now, are you getting sick of getting powdered up the amount that you're doing stuff in studio? As somebody who has gotten for so many years grinding to be behind the scenes and now so many years now being in the forefront, have you come to enjoy the makeup chair?
I just feel bad for Michelle and Gina and the makeup folks at MLB Network for having to work with this palette and trying to make it look presentable to go on TV. So it's really, I appreciate those people very, very much.
We pay our sponsors off first real quick. We are presented by Bet Online, as always, your number one source for your basketball info, stats, news, and scores. Latest odds and lines, latest matchup reports for the year's NBA playoffs. It's your sports intel headquarters for the season. Covered for all your wagering needs, basketball, NBA, of course, MLB, NHL, hockey, golf, UFC, and boxing. Fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Live betting options in your favorite casino and card games available to you right from your home. Get into the action today. Head over to the website and go to your mobile device and join. To be sure to use our promo code. It's BELIEVE, BLEAV. Get 50% off, a 50% bonus on your first deposit. It's Bet Online where the game starts. And we get started here at kind of, I guess, the quarter turn. I mean, stuff how quick this thing goes. I want to start here because it was the biggest conversation overall before we came in, and that was the pitch clock. And I think people kind of didn't pay attention even to the other rules of how stolen bases might change or anything else because they got so set on that, like previously on 24 bit, like with how that clock was going to stare at you. How much do you think it's gone smoother than you thought it would be originally? And what, if anything, has stood out to you, Mark, that maybe has kind of not been as smooth as it could be here in the early going?
I actually think it's been as smooth, if not smoother, than anybody could have possibly imagined. I wondered about the television aspect of it. Like you said, that clock just sort of always being omnipresent. And it seems like most of the networks that I've watched, most of the regional networks that run games, they don't even put it up there until it's like 6 seconds or 7 seconds left, when it might become an issue. It's not like the shot clock. It's sort of like shot clock in the NBA. You don't always see that shot clock on the screen until it gets to about 14 or 10 or something like that. The NFL doesn't put the play clock up there for every play until it gets to 6, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, they got to beat this clock. So I think it's been great. I think the product itself has been just unbelievably better. And I think anybody who's watched baseball this year would have to agree. I've yet to hear one fan um, that I know tell me like, yeah, I don't really like these faster games. I really feel like we're missing some of that dead time where guys were readjusting their batting gloves, or pitchers were thrown over to first base 9 times, even though the guy was taking a 2-step lead off first base. So I honestly think that Rob Manfred has reshaped his legacy with these rules, with the pitch clock in particular, because the product is just so much more enjoyable to watch.
I think it's been fantastic. I really, and I think getting some of the kinks out more in spring training and having some of the mistakes and games ending because and all that we needed that, and I think it enabled people to have that kind of oh crap moment of this is how it's going to go, and there's not going to be exceptions. I guess the one question that I have, and I ask this openly because it's one that I've had going into it, was whether or not we needed to. We're in May right now. When we get to the playoffs, and I know as baseball fans, we're all like this. We love the moment. I think about Vin Scully, the greatest to me to ever do it, letting the game breathe, right? And what does that mean? It means the ambient sound of that 3-2 outs where he doesn't have to speak, and you even on radio, right, can feel all of that. You lose a little of that in the big spots because of the quickened pace. Does that bother you at all? Or have you ever thought about maybe is there a way to kind of have some kind of dichotomy where later in games or later in season or in the playoffs, there's some way to give a little wiggle room? And I know I'm being, but just play devil's advocate. That's one thing that I've thought of. Well, geez, am I going to be more bothered by it in a divisional playoff game in the ninth inning when I want to feel a little bit more of that impatience waiting for the next pitch.
Yeah, I thought about it as well during spring training when I first started watching games with the pitch timer, and unfortunately, there's nothing you can do. This is the game now, and you're not going to put different rules into the playoffs. The only different rule you're going to see in the playoffs is the ghost runner disappears, which I think is the right call. I was not a fan of the ghost runner. I'm still a little mixed on it, but at the same time, when I'm covering a game, I'm perfectly happy not to sit there for 18 innings
Right?
on May
Oh,
12th.
you're not
So,
kidding.
and both sides, they both get the same scenario. So it's not like a sudden death situation. To me, the only concern I have in the playoffs that I've wondered about, the disengagement rule to me is going to be a bigger issue than the pitch timer because, if you've got a fast guy on first base in a tie game or a one-run game, the pitcher used to be able to really do their thing to try to hold him on and control the running game. Now it's really more up to the catcher and the pitcher in terms of the timing to the plate. But we haven't seen, remember, even though you can only throw over twice, it's not like the runner can then take a 30-foot lead because you can still throw again. And if you get him out, he's out. If you don't get him out, he gets second base, even if he dives back to first. But, it's going to take a little getting used to. But at the same time, these guys will have had 6 months of getting used to it and playing with these rules in place. So I think by the time the playoffs get here, this is all going to be so baked in and just so second nature. I don't think it's going to be much of an
In
issue.
a world in 2023 where everybody will consume, right now, 6 minutes in, somebody has paused and will listen to the rest on the way home in 4 hours, right? I mean,
We
that's
hope.
how we, right? I said, listen, not watch, so they don't
R-
have to look at us.
rather than
Yeah.
rather than pause and say, "Yeah, I'm not going back to that."
But you know how it is, and even when I listen to right, I mean, everything is that way. What this has done to me is enabled people to be in that clicker mode they live the rest of their life, where we ask them to slow down. And we love baseball, right? Like you and I are not going to complain as much. If a game was 3.5 hours and it's great, it's fine. But it was when it's not great and it was 3.5 hours,
Right.
to your point, when it was like, two crappy teams in the eighth inning of a game, 3 hours and 40 minutes in an AL game, that we don't have to deal with that anymore. I think it's been fantastic. I want to go to the Rays. To me, is it fair to call what they're doing a surprise when we have so many times in different machinations of this franchise been through oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize they'd be this good?
I think you can call it a surprise that they started 13-0 because nobody ever starts 13-0. And when they lost their first game, everybody said, "Oh, well, they just played four crappy teams, and that's why they're third. Let's see what happens when they play the real teams." Well, guess what? They're 19-11 since then. And do I think they're a team that's going to play 750 baseball for the year? No. Um, do I think that division is just a bear and probably the one that benefits the most from the new schedule? Absolutely. They're not going to have to play each other 19 times this year. All of a sudden, it's 13 times, and that's a little more palatable when you take those other 24 games and spread them out amongst the rest of the league, including some bad teams in there. Um, but I'm never surprised at what the Rays do because they're just as smart an organization as we have in the game. And I give Eric Neander and Peter Bendix and their whole front office a lot of credit because we know what they're working with, right? They don't have the payroll. They're in a division with teams like the Yankees and the Red Sox that spend a lot, the Blue Jays who can spend a lot, the Orioles who have this just, fantastic pipeline of players coming up. And, you know, it's amazing what they do. They're consistently a contender with limited financial resources. And, do I expect them to win 110 games? Probably not. But do I expect them to win 100 and be right there as the AL East champions? That would not surprise me in the
And to
slightest.
your point, in that division, even more uber impressive. Here's the thing to me that I guess is a little bit surprising, and I think almost even more powerful about what this organization has accomplished. They used to churn out, it would be 7 different bullpen names every year that all were dominant. It would be a new couple of and I'm not talking about when we had the heralded, Matt Moores and Chris Archers and Garzas, but
Right.
even guys, look, you think about how many names we've had that we didn't know, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, there's another guy the Rays have found. For them to do it offensively and have so much of it powered by their offense. Because they always found a way in that organization, Mark, through trades and development, which they're so terrific at, which we never pay enough attention to, right? From down in their system, to get guys who could fill roles in their pitching staff. How impressed are you that they've done so much of this offensively? Because that usually you got to pay that dollar to get dudes to do that.
That is the surprise, I think, of this season is that when you look at their lineup up and down, your casual baseball fan has probably heard of Wander Franco, has possibly heard of Randy Rosarena because of
Yeah,
what he has done in the
probably.
postseason,
WBC
right? I mean,
helped that,
if you've
right?
watched the
Yeah.
WBC and if
Yeah.
you've watched
Yeah.
playoff baseball, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Rosarena's been a.
Yep.
The rest of the lineup is not, a couple guys, Lau and Lowe and Isaac Paredes and Yandy Diaz. These are not household. This is not Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, and and Rafael Devers. So, I think the fact that people are probably surprised because they aren't necessarily familiar with the players. They've got 6 players on pace for 85 RBIs. That that's pretty insane. They've got guys. You look at their OPSs up and down the lineup. You know, Yandy Diaz is over 1,000. Rosarena, Josh Lowe, these guys are over 950. Got a couple other guys over 800, 850. It's just
Mhm.
it's a relentless lineup, even though it's not one that you think of when you look at it and say, how are these guys doing it? And
Yep.
you're starting to hear, I mean, maybe the most ignorant thing I've heard in the media, and I don't like going after media, but this was the 2 guys in New York on FAN, Evan Roberts and Craig Carton, talking about, well, they must be cheating. Something's going on. I'm not saying they're cheating, but how are these guys doing this? There must be something going on.
Yeah.
You know what's going on? They're really good baseball players. You just
You're
don't watch
right.
Rays games,
That's
and you don't know who
exactly
they
right.
are.
That's exactly
So
right. And Mark, I'm not comparing the offensive specifically, but you go back to when the Royals were like a juggernaut offensively in terms of the way that they would just score runs and find a way. And we didn't at the time know a lot of those names were either. I mean, that's where we got the development at the time of Moustakas. I know some of those panned out, some didn't, but Kane and Hosmer and those guys. To me, the thing that I love about what the Rays have this year is I go back to, and I know we all remember Blake Snell with that World Series and that whole thing, but you go back to that World Series in general, and to me, covering it, it was always, how are the Rays going to score more than 2 runs in this game? No matter what those guys had done, and they weren't this prolific in the regular season, but you knew, right? I mean, Brasso was hitting. I mean, you had all these different. Who in the world against the best pitching, if they're facing a Walker Bueller the next night in a game, whatever, who's going to hit those guys? How much better set does this team seem to be? Because I think, to me, that's the scariest part. And I know how far they went that year, so I'm not taking anything away. But now, to me, you have to fear every aspect of this team. This isn't some little engine that could when they head into October.
it's the teams you're talking about where you look, oh, they're really good going first to third. They're really good situational hitting and all that. And when you think about those Royals teams, I mean, you thought about, Lorenzo Cain and Alex Gordon. They were always good taking the extra base. They were smart hitters, situational. The Rays are still that team, except they also have 84 home runs as we sit here right now, which is 19 clear of the next team in the
It's
American League.
crazy. It's
I mean,
crazy.
they lead the league in home runs by a wide margin. And as we sit here right now, they are 2 stolen bases off of the league lead. So this is not just a team that relies on thumping the ball, though certainly they can do it. They can also play that small ball. They can also play that situational hitting. They're very well rounded. Kevin Cash is a very good manager. Their front office does a great job of putting people in the right places, shuttling arms up and down when they need to, always making sure that bullpen is loaded. They're really impressive, and you'd like to see more people take note of a team like this and start to make guys like the ones we're talking about more household names because they're great players. And my fear is that we're gonna get to Seattle in the middle of July, and there's gonna be like no Rays in the starting lineup, even though they're gonna have the best record in the league. And you'll the players you hope take and vote some of these guys in, and so hopefully you'll have some representatives from Tampa Bay at the All Star game because the way they're playing this year, they deserve it.
I want to go to the other side of it. The Cardinal way.
is being
it
redefined this year.
it is okay. So I want to go to let's before this year. When I looked at the Cardinal way, it was and I even have you have friends, Matt Holiday and guys who have been in there, and they speak to you, and it's like okay, then you almost want to be like you honor off the air, like all right, bro, like I get it. But like it's a little bit much, and like what
It's like
does
a
that
cult.
mean? And like right, it's like some kind of it's like Red Sox Nation. Like to me, like when I covered, it's like I don't even what does that mean really? It's like so. However, they were professional, even if they touted it too much, right? Even when the fan base this is the fan base that says they're the greatest fans. It's kind of how everything went. But from that logo to that city, everything represented the right way to do it, even if we were pounded into us how much it was better than every other way. How have they become the example of how not to do something in such short order?
Are you saying that signing a catcher to a 5-year, $87.5 million contract and then taking his position away 5 weeks into the season is not the way to do it? I'm confused, Casey. Uh, Look, they're off to a tough start. Obviously, Contreras has been a failure to this point in terms of what they were expecting from him. He's one of the better hitting catchers, but you put him in the DH spot, he's just another guy. You know, Goldschmidt's doing Goldschmidt things. Arenado's not having quite the year that you expect from him in some areas. At the same time, he's on pace for 110 RBIs and 30 home runs, and he's not the problem either. I think Jordan Walker came up as this savior. He's continuing the Cardinal way. This is our next great Cardinal, and he still may be. I saw that guy in spring training. I covered the Cardinals for 2 or 3 days in spring training, and I mean, just watching him take BP, watching him in games, watching him out the out, he was just so athletic and so big and so strong. And you're sort of like, wow, this is like the National League's Aaron Judge. Like the Cardinals might have this kind of guy. Starts out with a hitting streak, and then all of a sudden they send him down, and you wonder, were they just trying to, they were obviously off to a tough start. Was it all right? We gotta do something here, and he has an option, and let's go let him go down and work on his fielding and work on his strikeouts. And uh, you have to let a guy like that breathe a little bit. You have to
Yeah,
let him go through
it
some
didn't make any
struggles, right?
sense. It didn't
I
make any
mean,
sense, Mark. No,
Volpe
come on.
had a rough patch in there, and there was never a thought. I
It's April.
remember, and I'm going way back here because I'm going to show why there's so much gray in my beard. But in 2005, when the Yankees were struggling and they called up Chim Wong and Robinson Cano, and Robinson Cano came up and he was this big prospect and everything else. You're the second baseman guy, and he came up and he started like 2 for 30 or something like that. And Joe Torre pulled him into his office and said, "Look, you're not going anywhere. You're our second baseman. Go. Like, don't worry about your start. Don't worry about getting sent back down. You're our guy." And turned things around and ended up having a really good rookie year. Had a very good career until some other things happened. But I was very shocked that the Cardinals, sent Walker down after 78 plate appearances. It just didn't seem like the Cardinal way, so to speak. But I mean, really, it's very simple. You look at their problems this year; it's all pitching. Their rotation has been
Oh yeah.
a mess. Jordan
Well,
Montgomery is their best
but
starter. Is
Mark,
2 and
they're
6
all
with a
blaming it
4.2
on
ERA.
they're all blaming it on Wilson Contreras. I mean, come on. I mean, it's the
Yeah,
oldest
you
thing.
know
This is
what?
the Wilson, another Wilson. This is the Wilson Ramos thing with Syndergaard. I mean, are we really?
What's the ERA? What's the ERA since Wilson Contreras left his
Yeah,
catching duties? This pitching staff has a lot more problems. And the thing is, you look at the names in the staff. I mean, Flaherty and Michaelis and
yeah,
Montgomery and Matz. This should be
yeah.
a better pitching staff. Wayne Wright.
Yes.
It should be a better pitching staff. It's not. And if they're not gonna pitch to their capabilities, then you could very well see the Cardinals, join the White Sox as one of the big sellers this year at the deadline.
No offense to any, and look, Wayno's on that list, and I love him, right? And by the way, smaller point, but WBC probably hurt the Cardinals a little bit when you think about, Wainwright at his age going through all the emotions. Arenado was so into those guys probably slowed down a little bit, I think, at the beginning anyway. Here's the thing. This is not the 96 Yankees or the 98. This is not, I don't have, Clemens and David Cohn. I don't have the bullpen they had where if all those guys come into my room and I'm Joe Torre or Marmo in this sense and say the catcher's the problem, right? They're back of the baseball cards with all those Cy Youngs and all those All-Stars. outside of Wayne, look, Miles Michaelis is a nice pitcher. He's a good pitcher. We know that Jordan Montgomery's had success. We know Steven Matz has been around, had some success. But this is not exactly, I'm sorry, the staff that, like, when they tell you it's the catcher that you just know for sure, okay, there's no way it could be any of them. You know what I'm saying? I just can't imagine how they did this to, and now from Contreras' standpoint, I know nobody looks at this. How's this dude supposed to gain his confidence back or the relationships with these people ever?
I,
And I mean,
I
in the
agree.
5 years ever.
I agree, and it's I don't know what they're working on the side. I know he's had conversations with the pitchers. He's trying, but what's going to? I mean, look, we're sitting here talking about how bad their season's been. They've won 7 of their last 9 as we're talking right now. So in their eyes, maybe this was the thing. But when you look at the games that they've won, I'm looking at the scores right now: 12-6, 8-6, 18-1, 9-1, 6-4. They're scoring a lot of runs. The offense is doing a lot. Pitching's been a little better. I don't know if that's a direct correlation to taking Contreras out of the catching duties, but again, you signed this guy for 5 years. You didn't give him $87 million to be a DH, and right now that's what he's going to be. I don't know how he gets it back. A lot of things, sort of like I just talked about with the young guys, you got to work through these things, and you can't work through these things in the bullpen. So I
No.
don't know. I don't have an answer for
And
this.
it's harder to work through them, though, when you know that everybody in that room is crapping on you. And now you got to go ahead and try and regain their trust. And the last thing I'll say in this is, I don't know what other comparisons to use. We've seen certainly in New York, where you were covering it and saw it firsthand. I'm not comparing Yadier Molina to Derek Jeter. I'm not. But when you think about what Yadier Molina was for all of those years, placing that guy not easy. From what I remember, when Didi was in there at the beginning and making a lot of errors, right? Tino Martinez didn't replace Don Mattingly and all of a sudden just immediately be great. In any situation that you're replacing a guy like that, no matter who you bring in, it's never going to be good enough to the fans or the people around because it's not that stature of guy. And to me, I don't think they gave this guy enough room to learn the Cardinal way.
Even more than that, Casey, when Didi Gregorius replaces Derek Jeter, he's one spot in the lineup. Yes, he's a shortstop. He's got to make the plays.
That's fair enough. That's true.
But those are only the balls that are hit to shortstop. Let's say
that's true.
4 a game.
Yep.
You're replacing Don Mattingly. It wasn't like Tino Martinez couldn't catch the ball at first.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Catching is a whole different world.
Yep.
And
fair enough.
Yadier Molina was, arguably one of the 3
Hall of
best
Famer.
defensive catchers we've ever seen.
Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer.
Certainly of his generation, he was the gold standard on defense. Yep. Good offensive player as well, but I'm just talking about his defense and work with the pitching staff.
Course. Yep.
And these guys, I mean, Waino particularly, the number of years he worked with Yadi, and all these other guys worked with him last year. It's an adjustment, and you knew it was going to be an adjustment. But John Mozeliak and Mike Gersh are really smart people. Like I'm not looking at them any differently because of the way this team started out. They played in a division against Wilson Contreras for years, right? Since 2016. So it wasn't like they watched him and said, that guy's a Gold Glove catcher. We got to have. They knew what they were getting.
Yep.
They knew what they were getting.
Yep.
They knew. I mean, Wilson Contreras to me has been, the guy I sort of compare him to is Jorge Posada.
Yep.
He wasn't the best defensive catcher in the league, but he wasn't terrible. He was better than people gave him credit for.
Yes, and caught big games in the playoffs.
Big games
Hendricks
in
a Game 6.
Series,
I mean, he's been through all that. Yes,
right. So and he was a good bat. I think Posada's better than Wilson Contreras. Let me just get that out of the way before.
I understand. I understand the comp.
Point.
I understand.
I don't think he was as bad. People used to just crap on Posada's defense.
Yes.
I watched him every day. The Roger Clemens and Andy Pettit, Mike Mussina, those guys.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody had a personal catcher on a specific year for whatever reason, because they like to have one catcher be a personal catcher just to keep them. But Clemens won a lot of games with Jorge Posada behind the plate. Mike Mussina won a lot of games with Jorge Posada behind the plate. So, I think Contreras wasn't given a fair shot. And the other thing that I look at, Contreras skipped the WBC for the exact reason of staying in spring training to work with his pitching staff. So, it's surprising to me that they were not able to be on the same page after the fact that this guy who desperately wanted to go play for his country didn't do it because he said, this is my first year here. I got to get to know my pitching staff. And he put a lot of work in there. And for whatever reason, it just didn't click.
Let me get two more from you. First, let me go yesterday, and I know the Mets, it came out recently before we're taping this here on a Wednesday that Mark Vientos is getting called up. That's not going to fix the Mets pitching issues. It's not going to fix the
Yep.
Verlander's home start issue, the getting booed. I mean, I've seen all sorts of different stuff talking about the leadership. I even just saw something. I think Kipnis was speaking out about Lindor's not. This is all the when you have a team that spends that much money at the beginning, right? You know that every mention of your team, for the most part, from the outside in the noise, is going to be negative until you win it all. And then they still may not appreciate it because of the money you spent. You covered and saw this first rate. This is exactly what the Yankees have dealt with for I don't know how many years. The Mets are now living that. So let me ask you, it's still only
On such a higher
and
level
a higher
too.
level, but it's still May 17th, right? They're 3 games under. They're only 6 something or whatever out of the division because the Braves came down a bit last couple of weeks. Is this still a season that could be everything ... or should there be panic buttons being pressed right now? Where are you on that rational meter of where the Mets are now?
I tend to be a more rational person for the sole reason that I'm not a fan. If I was a fan, I'd be calling the
If it was
sports
the
radio
Commanders, I
stations
wouldn't
and,
ask you this question.
well, exactly right. Um, you know, I understand why the fans are having the reactions they are because they're fans, and fan is short for fanatic, and I get it. At the same time, they're 20 and 23. 4 years ago, we watched a team that was 19 and 31 win the World Series. So I, I don't I don't usually really pay that close attention to standings probably until June 1st. And even then, depending on where things are, we've seen teams come back from 8 games in September. So I think the Mets are going to go as far as their starting pitching ultimately takes them. I think they're counting on more than 4.7 and 4.8 ERAs from Verlander and Scherzer. Uh, it's dangerous. You're counting on a 38-year-old and a 40-year-old to be healthy and to be their vintage selves at ages when pitchers typically are not their vintage selves. Senga has had some ups and downs so far. Um, the bullpen's been better than anybody possibly thought since Diaz went down. Uh, I think when he went down, everybody's like, "Oh my
Yeah,
God, what's the
they thought
bullpen
that
doing?"
would
The
be the
bullpen's been
reason, it not getting to
right.
him.
David
And
Robertson's
David
been
Peterson, by the
been
way.
his
How about
old
David
all star
Peterson?
self.
Yeah, David Peterson's ERA
Yeah,
was like
David
800.
Peterson.
Now he's sent out. I mean, what a
Yeah,
mess that
right.
became. Oof.
Yeah. So you look at Robertson and Ottavino and all these guys in the bullpen.
Yeah,
They're pitching great. So the
they've
bullpen
done
hasn't
their
been a
job.
problem.
Not at all.
The rotation's been an issue, and,
Yes.
the offense has been an issue. I
Yes.
mean, and they brought up Brett Beatty, and he's been
Yeah.
okay. They're bringing up Vientos now, who was just tearing it up at AAA, and they're
Yeah.
hoping maybe he can give them a little spark. Alvarez has been a disappointment to this point. Their offense is basically Alonso,
Yeah.
and Lindor's been okay. He's got a bunch of
No,
RBIs, but his numbers overall are
been
not
okay.
very good.
Yep.
So I think they've got the pieces there, but I think the starting pitching's got to keep them in more games. They need those two big horses. If they can just get to the playoffs, right? You don't even have to overtake the Braves ultimately. Braves have their own problems with their pitching injuries. You don't have to overtake the Braves. Get to the wild card, get through the wild card. If you've got Verlander, Scherzer, and a third guy, whether that's Senga, whether that's, ultimately
Somebody
Carrasco,
in the
ultimately
trade market,
Quintana, whoever it
right?
may be.
Yep.
Trade market. I mean, at this point, go trade for whoever you want. The
Yep.
money's not the issue,
Yep.
right? Um, if you've got those two guys at the top with a viable third and fourth starter behind them, they're going to be whether they're favored or not, they're going to be at least right there with any team in the National League. Because if Verlander and Scherzer are Verlander and Scherzer, that's a really tough task for anybody in a short
Let me
series. But
let me
it's too early.
let me sneak this one in because I know you got to run. But I want to ask you. You give me just a 60-second pulse. We sit May 17. The biggest story to me of the whole year will, regardless of it's prevalent every day, today, tomorrow, or we talk about it more at the deadline or after, and then in free agency, is Otani. The biggest star in the sport. Where's he going to go? Where's he going to play? as we sit here now, where it's, a little bit quieter on that front and more on, his performances for now, and hitting 9 million miles every time. It's amazing watching this guy perform. Where are you if you had to kind of put a pie percentage wise that he ends this season? Forget about what happens in free agency, in another uniform.
I'd say it's like 10%. I just don't. I don't know that Artie Moreno wants to trade him, whether they're in it or not. There's too many tickets to be sold. There's too many TV ratings. There's too many sponsorship opportunities, and there's the small chance, I think you'd have to put it at, that they're able to somehow convince him to stay. Right now, as we sit here, they're 22 and 21. They're 2.5 out of a wild card. They're 4.5 out of the division. But again, if you go back a year, they were right around the same thing, and then they lost like 13 in a row, and Joe Madden got fired. So again, I don't look at mid-May as being a standings where I'm saying, "Oh, look at the Angels. They're right there. They're so close to playoff position." There's 120 games left. So, if the Angels are hanging around in the wild card race, they're definitely not going to trade Ohtani. If they were to go through a 13-game losing streak again, and all of a sudden you find yourself 10 games out of a wild card spot and 15 games out of the division, I think you have to at least listen, right? I mean, Perry's a really smart guy who's been around this game for a long time, and he knows. I have to think he already knows what the odds are that they actually re-sign Ohtani. And if he knows they're not going to sign him, he's going to have that uncomfortable conversation with ownership and say, look, we're not re-signing this guy, and we can go out and get 5, 6, 7 prospects for the last 2.5 months of the season of this guy. It's irresponsible not to do that. So I think, if the Angels are even within sniffing distance of a wild card spot, Ohtani doesn't go anywhere. The only way he goes anywhere is if this season just completely goes in the tank. Because the teams that are out there waiting to pounce, in the offseason, the Dodgers, the Mets in particular, I think are going to be very, very heavy after Ohtani. So, yeah, it's going to be a big deal. I would say that's the second biggest story. The Baltimore Orioles having the second best record in the American League. You want to ask me my biggest surprise? That's my biggest surprise. I thought they were great story last year.
You thought they outkicked their coverage a year ago.
I'm not really outkicked their coverage, but I thought they were in prime position to go out and get a guy like Nathan Eovaldi this winter. Veteran guy, lead your young pitching staff, guy who's been to the playoffs, been to the World Series, had success, and they didn't do it. And I was a little bummed about that. And I said, I think the Orioles, had they gone out and gotten a guy like Eovaldi, made a couple of signings, they really could have challenged. And I thought they'd be good this year. I didn't think they'd be second best record in the American League 6 weeks into the season good.
With unhittable arms in the bullpen that everyone's like, wait, what? Who?
And Adley Rutschman is absolutely one of my favorite players.
And they got more coming. It's amazing. They got more coming too.
Yep.
Mark, appreciate you, man. Thanks for all the time.
Elias. The process doesn't always work. It's working in Baltimore.
Yeah, nice shot at the Sixers. Take it easy, buddy. Appreciate you.
You got it, man.
All right, thank you. There he is, Mark Feinsand. Appreciate him being on board. As continue here on Unfiltered, and you could join us on Twitter, of course, at Casey Stern along the way. You can get us on YouTube and be with us throughout all the social platforms. We'll be back for episode number 182. As always, we're presented by our good friends at BetOnline.